All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give everybody just a quick second to hop in and make sure that all the connections happen. We know it takes a minute with Zoom for the audio to click in and for everything to sync up. So welcome. We would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat and say hi and tell us where you're from and what you teach. That is always fun for us to see. And I'm going to pull up and see. Awesome. Hey, Cody. Hey, Mandy. We're so excited to chat with you guys today about digital citizenship. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. And I'm going to say a small prayer that Zoom is going to work today, because you never know. I could not share my screen the other day in a training. It would be black for everybody.
Oh,
and
no.
It did not matter what I did. It did not work. It was super frustrating. So happens to us too. All right. So hopefully you guys can see my screen. Robin, can you see my screen okay?
Yes,
okay,
very good.
Awesome. And I'm going to pull up, let's see. You guys can chat, right? Everybody can chat in the webinar thing. I think we're good. Okay, so we are here today, Design for Learning, to talk about digital citizenship and what that means for student privacy and what it means for educators and why it's important and how we can make it something that's not just one more thing in our classrooms. This is a 3-part series, so this is week 1. We've got a series next week and then the week after on Wednesday. So we're so excited that you guys are joining us, and we hope you come back the next 2 weeks as well. So to introduce myself, my name is Amanda Taylor. I live in sunny Southern California. I am living in San Diego right now. Currently in Orange County visiting a friend, but normally that is where I live. Originally from Texas, where I was a high school teacher for several years. Now I do mostly out of the classroom work. I still do teacher training, but I'm a project manager, which seems like a far step from teaching, but it really isn't. It's just managing adults instead of children or minors. And I work with a couple of large deployment projects, which are super fun and keep me busy and driving quite a bit. So the topics for this series are obviously digital citizenship and student privacy, but the way we've broken it down is today we're going to really define what it means to have digital citizenship in your classroom. And we're going to talk about the 5 core dispositions. All of this, if you're familiar with Common Sense Media, it's going to look familiar because they are one of the leading providers of education and training for digital citizenship. Next week, we're really going to be talking about student privacy. So if that's something that's always been kind of a mystifying topic for you, we would love for you to come and get that demystified. We're going to have Kevin Fairchild, who is an amazing tech admin at his local district. And then the following week, the 3rd week, in 2 weeks, we're going to have some teachers on and sharing how they've successfully implemented digital citizenship and are practicing those student privacy pieces in their classroom and really show how they make it look easy. So I'm so excited to introduce our guest for today, Robin. I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself so you can tell us a little bit about what you do and where you teach.
Hi, I'm Robin Elak, and I live on the central coast of California. I work in Guadalupe, California, but live in Santa Maria, California. I am completing my 21st year at my school site. I am an 8th grade history teacher, and I also oversee the AVID program in our school district. We're a K-8 district, married to an assistant principal, raising teenage sons. And my part-time job, as if I don't have enough going on, is I'm a staff developer for the AVID organization. So I spend my summers, luckily we get to travel again this summer. And so I get to go to many wonderful locations across the United States, providing professional development in the area of AVID to teachers all across the nation.
That's awesome. I am excited about travel. As much as I love virtual training, there's just something different about being in person and face to face. And Sorry, I'm getting over a cold from like a month ago. I'm looking forward to that. And I love the plane travel. I love the decompression that you get on a plane. So kind of a weird trainer thing, but I totally understand that. And raising teenage sons has to be interesting in this day and age.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'll be there in a couple years. My kids are 10 and 12. A fun story that I like to tell is my 10-year-old, when he was 8, figured out how to break into our Google Home app, figured out how to download it, figured out my husband's password, and changed the Wi-Fi password for our entire house at 8 years old.
Lovely.
And we thought we had been hacked because when we asked the kids, obviously we knew our daughter couldn't do this. So we asked our kids and our son was like, nope, wasn't me. And then a couple weeks later, something else happened. And the thing that he used aligned so well with the password that we figured out was changed to. And so I came back to him and I was like, that was you, wasn't it? And he was like, yeah, I just really didn't want to get in trouble. And I knew dad was going to be mad. So we've had to work on hacking for good, and how to use that creativity for positive change, because he's either going to be a superhero or a villain, and we would prefer to stay on the superhero side, yes, even though he has potential for both. Super fun. So I think that's a great segue into, what is digital citizenship? I'm sure so many teachers, when they hear that phrase, they kind of cringe a little, because it's one of those things at the beginning of the year that admins share out, make sure you've got your lessons or how many times you're doing this a year, and they shove, they share common sense media and everything you need to hear. It turns into this like checkbox thing. So digital citizenship is using technology responsibly to learn, create, and participate in the digital world. And this definition comes from Common Sense Media. And what we know is that digital citizenship is not how to use a computer. It is not how to use an iPad. Those are digital skills, and there is room for that. Like, we need that too. This is, being respectful and being responsible with said technology. So I got this quote from a fellow teacher that I work with who said, no matter what subject you teach, digital citizenship should always be part of the conversation. And something that I've learned as an educator, I started teaching in 2005, and we were lucky to have a projector in our classroom at that point. We used to get these technology surveys at the end of the year, and I would always check well, if I had it, I would use it. And then when I did have it, I didn't know how to use it. And that's always fun. But I don't think we could have anticipated just how quickly, even though it seemed like it took forever, seeing the change of how technology and the digital experience has impacted just all the parts of our life. And the same way that it impacts all the parts of our life, it has to impact all the parts of our classroom. And one of the things that I heard from a teacher, and then Robin, I want to hear your opinion on this, is she said that digital citizenship is not separate. It's actually a part of classroom management. It's part of the behavior management of your class. As a trainer and as a teacher, and even as a parent, how do you see that playing out in what you're doing right now?
I totally agree with all of that. I think it's about preparing our students to have a future, to be future ready, right? So I think about how long I've been in my career, right? And I think my career started my actual getting a paycheck career, but my career as an educator isn't farther than that because of, I was a student at one point. Yeah. And so I am of that generation where the Apple IIe was my first computer in my classroom, and we were playing Oregon Trail. And so where have we come, in that time period? And yet we always have to be future ready. So, being in that mindset of we're preparing our students who are sitting in front of our faces right now for things that might not even come. And I share that a lot with my students. I share that with my own boys. I remember, my sons are almost 14 and I have a 16-year-old, and I remember one day my younger one, when he was much younger, he was like 5 or 6, he asked me, Mom, what was your favorite website when you were little? And I was like, oh, buddy, oh no, that's mom predates that. So
Yeah.
but like, like webs and apps, and think about like how easy it is to get on our iPhones now and to do things there, right? But we've had to kind of teach ourselves. And so knowing that we're in front of our kids, preparing them for things that they don't even know, we don't even know exist yet. They're the ones who are going to be creating that. So we have to be inspiring enough that we're teaching them how to use what is out there now and be aware of the things now, but know that they're going to be doing things with things that we haven't even fully embraced and thought yet.
Yeah. I think it's similar but different than the way like I used to get frustrated. I'm not a mathematical student. That was a really struggle point for me. But I majored in family consumer sciences. I was a home ec teacher for years, and I learned math in a different way. And since then, I have been able to apply that knowledge across the board. So now I can see math in everything. Where as a, I struggled with that when I first started teaching. I struggled how to make my subject area apply to everything else. But they really do mix together. I think one of the problems we have is unless you have a strong academic support or admin support, it's really easy to get siloed as a teacher, whether you're an elementary school teacher and you're stuck with the same 30 kids all day, possibly more than that, or you're a high school teacher and you've got 150 to 200 kids rolling through your classroom a day. So I think the first part is changing the conversation within yourself and really starting to observe where all of these things make a difference. One of the kind of off topic, and hopefully it's not a trigger issue for anybody, but I think the same conversation around consent is very similar. There's so many ways where asking permission to be a part of something is now part of our conversation, where 3 years ago I'd have been like, what? Same thing with digital citizenship. And it took a shift for me in my brain for me to be able to look at it that way. And so now when we have conversations with our children, we talk about that. And it's more than just what they do on the screen, but it's also what they do off the screen. And that's actually a great segue into this one here, but how does it relate to my subject in class? Because I get this a lot. And as an answer to that, I want to point out the 6 core topics for digital citizenship. Again, this is put out by Common Sense Media. And when you look at these, I struggle to think that any teacher could not find at least one of these that applies to the scholars that are in their classroom. So even if you are teaching physics or chemistry or advanced math, there's still parts of these things that we care about as students, because you don't just teach math, you teach the student, right? And your students care about digital well-being because that is part of their life. And it doesn't mean that you have to be all like hip and in the know. But we all know that the power of our words and actions is important. And so just having those communications and being able to say, it's like when you're on Instagram and you're showing a part of yourself, but that's not really who you are. You can relate that to classroom behavior as well. How have you seen some of these things in your classroom or with teachers that you work with?
I mean, I think, but just looking at them, right, you can take the word digital completely off this entire thing, right? And they still are like goals that we should all kind of be achieving, right? We need to find balance in our lives. We need to care about each other's privacy. We define who, like all of these are still things that I think just being a kind human being does for each other in the world that we live in today. So yes, these come from Common Sense Media, and they're kind of that digital mindset that we need to kind of be, it kind of goes back to that idea of like having a growth mindset. It's also that digital mindset, and we need to grow our digital mindset. But I think I think honestly, you could take the word digital out and it still is applicable to who we are today, really, and
Yeah.
what we want from our students, our kids, life in general. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the big aha as you were talking and me looking at those 6 areas. Um, can you repeat the question? Because I kind of wanted to talk
Yeah.
about that first.
No. I get it. Actually, I want to talk really quick about the we are kind and courageous, right? That's how you say that word. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a surprise to anybody or not that knows me, but I was totally bullied in high school and middle school for that matter, and probably elementary school too. I wasn't like hardcore like bullied, but I was made fun of. I definitely had insecurities, and the kids at school that just like get it, and then they just totally like prey on you because they know that you're like a sensitive person. Um, we had that back in our day, right? So that hasn't changed. Take away cyber and digital, we had bullying, drama, and hate speech. And a lot of these line up with social emotional learning, which is really important as well. And I know it's so hard because the big push that I got when I was first starting teaching is, well, these things should be taught at home. And that's true, but there's also part of what we do as teachers is teach kids how to be human beings, and how to be citizens of this world. Why do we teach all students history? Because we want them to have a base foundation knowledge. So when they are adults, they understand how our government works, how society works, how and why things are run. Why do we make kids go all the way through Algebra 2? Because we want them to have a base foundational knowledge of all of these things. Same thing with writing, same thing that all these core disciplines that we have, we want them to have those skills. And I remember somebody was complaining about like, well, I just want to know how to do my taxes. Like they didn't teach that. That's something that's really hard to teach to high school kids because they don't even have a concept of an income. So to be able to teach something that's so outside of their like scope, unless they just happen to be that kid that is already like supporting part of their family, teaching something so out of context is tough. But they have the foundation for all of those skills. They were taught the foundation in math, in civics, in history. It's just putting the pieces together. So these things here apply to almost every single situation in your classroom. It's just really opening it up and thinking and reflecting on how these things work. So as a teacher and as a trainer, do any of these stand out to you more than others, or which ones do you? I have a lot of questions. I want to know which ones are the hardest, which ones are the easiest. Um, for me, looking at this, gosh, all of them.
Yeah.
We are critical thinkers and creators. As a career and technology educator, like that was always a big one. We are critical thinkers and creators. We can think critically. We can solve problems, which ties in with news and media literacy. What about you? Which one resonates with you the most?
I think the one that really resonates me right the most is, and I'm kind of thinking this in terms of, you had mentioned earlier how, some parents or some people will say, well, that should be taught at home and that something different should be taught at school. So the privacy one, we care about everyone's privacy. I feel like with going what we've all gone through with COVID and now coming kind of on the other end, hopefully, fingers crossed, that those lines have been blurred even more, because educators were really in the homes, right? We were in each other's homes, whether, my students last year, as I was teaching online, they saw my sons, I got to see my students' puppy dogs, and I got to see which kid was sitting in the living room and which kid was sitting at the kitchen table. And so some of those lines have really been blurred. And so knowing that we need to emphasize privacy, I think, is one that's important, knowing what we've all just experienced. But I think even more so with, this year has been such a challenge. We thought it would be so wonderful to all be back on campus together. And then TikTok challenges blew up education, right? And so, and the things that kids are sharing, because to be honest, I feel like a lot of us forgot how to interact with each other. We were
Yeah.
all at home in our bubbles and we didn't know how to interact with each other. And so some things that we knew kind of are became a recessive gene almost. And so we have to kind of re-emphasize that. And I think the privacy one is just one that kind of like really stands out to me, because I think a lot of times people are so willing to share things. And I know, like, I think of my nieces and my nephews, and I'm following, who are older, and I follow them on their accounts. And sometimes I'm like, the aunt in me is like, do you really want that out? Like, do I report
Yeah.
you to your my brother and my sister-in-law? Come on.
Yeah.
So it's things like that I think that's one that's really important to me. And I think looking at it as in the teacher lens, the critical thinkers and the creators, like that's where I feel most inspired, because I feel like as an educator, I can do that. I have the skill set to help them develop their critical thinking skills and then use the digital world to create and share that out with others. So
Yeah. I think, and one of the questions I get is like, okay, so I get it for like, middle grade, upper grade, like that makes sense. But what about my littles? What about my littles, that aren't, either we only use the iPad once a week, or, how do we handle that? And I think with privacy, and we actually talk about this with our children, because not surprisingly, my son's computer has gotten hacked. So we had to give him a stronger password. But one of the things that we talked about is that your password is private. Your password is for you, and we don't share passwords with other people. Obviously, mom and dad know your password because it's important, and you're minors, and we are technically in charge of you. But that, we don't share passwords. And I still see some school districts where every student has the same password. And so the modeling is also there. So how we model to students is also an example of a digital citizenship conversation. And just like in math or in English, sometimes we have to, we have that metacognition where we're saying why we're doing it while we're doing it. Like, this is why, and then this is why I'm doing this. And now I have this problem and now I'm solving it. We can do that with digital citizenship as well. So when kids complain about their password, or when they complain about, why can't we just do it this way? Why can't I post my picture on this website? We can reference back to these things and how we model. How is your media balance and well-being, your balance in your digital life as a teacher? Do you share that with your students? I know a lot of teachers are burnt out right now. I heard the term earlier today, they have a Zoom hangover, which I can definitely see how that would be frustrating. So for those of you that are watching, I would love to know in the chat, which one do you think is the most important right now within your community? And I think every community is different. The kids that my school used to go to, we are kind and courageous, and we know the power of our words and actions was really big, because it was a very cliquish community. And if you weren't in the in crowd, you weren't in the in crowd, and it could be really hurtful. And fortunately, they didn't have the layer of actually adding technology to that. But we know that as the kids get older, especially middle school, that just gets harder and harder. My children asked me when I got my first cell phone, which for me actually was in high school. I got my first cell phone my maybe my senior year, maybe my junior year. But my parents owned a company. And so they were able to put a line on theirs, and my mom was obsessed with knowing where I was all the time. So that she was able to do that. But now we can track our kids, which is terrifying, but also really awesome at the same time. So we have be kind and courageous. Kind and courageous stands out to our audience as well. Let's see, what do we have on the next slide? Okay, so this is the question. I did a training a couple months ago, and we were talking about how digital citizenship is really more about digital conversations. It's about including it in the language. It's about making the invisible visible. Because I had a couple of teachers that were like, but I don't teach technology. It's not part of my standards. And I said, well, do you use technology in your classroom? And they said, yes. And I said, said, well, then it is officially part of your standards because you're utilizing a tool. And the example that Rob and I were talking about offline before we started was if I brought in a new class pet, or if I brought in a new piece of equipment or a tool and I wanted my students to use it, I would have to train them to use it, right? I don't just give kindergartners scissors. We have the whole lessons around how to use scissors and how to be safe with them. And then even after that lesson, we have protocols about how we behave when the scissors are in the classroom. Digital citizenship is not something that you teach once a year, just like your classroom rules are not something you teach once a year. One of the greatest statements I've ever heard was take the phrase, they should know better, out of your vocabulary. Because while they should, they are children. And even grown adults don't always know better. So we have to assume every day that they need to be reminded. And that doesn't have to be, nagging or harping. So what are some of the ways, Robin, that you have seen this successfully, and even in your own classroom? Like, how do you teach digital citizenship? What does that flow look like for you over a year or a month or even a daily lesson?
So I think there's the almost, I would say, the physicality of how we're using a tool, and so in my classroom, we're a Google district. We are heavily using Google Classroom as a way to access the curriculum, to access our classroom lessons, whether it's a Google Slides or doing a Google drawing, to access the curriculum and do something with the curriculum to show their learning of the curriculum. So there's the physicality of how they're going about using all of those tools that have to be taught and modeled. Even things such as, like, at the beginning, because I don't have them do, like, using Google Slides, I'll use that as my example. I will create one slide deck, I share it out with the entire class, and then I assign. So, student A is on slide 1, student B is on slide 2, so on down the list. And then you train them, right? Every time they open this up, they go to their slide. They can only ever touch their slide. They're not going to touch anyone else's slide. And every time you teach this lesson, in the first few months, there's going to be a kid who deletes a slide because they thought they were on their slide. They deleted something, it deleted their slide. So you're constantly having to teach that skill. And you want to teach that skill because once they have that skill down, then the way you can enhance and make the content more rigorous, because you can get to the meat of the content, is beautiful. But you have to be able to teach them those basic skills, right? And I think that kind of goes with, like, what you were saying, the home economics, when you learn to cook, right? You don't start with, like, the hardest thing in the world, some Julia Child French cooking thing, right?
No, we start with biscuits.
You start with the basics, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think my first thing was, like, scrambled eggs when I was a kid. I was a pro at scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
But so that's the same model of what we apply to our classrooms, right? You start with the physicality and laying out the groundworks. Even simple things of, like, hey, eyes on me, put your screens at 45. And so they know that their screens go down at 45. I need them to talk, I need them to hear what I'm saying for a few moments before I go back and have them access the content. That's a classroom management thing that would, if you don't have that down as the educator in the classroom, then you're going to have the kid who, like, can't take their eyes off their screen and listen to you at the same time because they're so focused on what's happening on the screen. So just modeling that. And sometimes I'll teach them the rocket. So, like, make a rock, put it on the bottom of the laptop, move the laptop down so that you rock your screens,
Nice. I like that. I've heard of 45 degrees.
Yeah. Sometimes I try to use the academic term, like, put your screens at 45, but sometimes they just need make a rock, put your rock down, close it down to your rock.
I've heard it when I was a teacher on special assignment. I used the word shark. So I would walk around the room and I would give a short, like, sharks in the water, sharks coming, because nobody likes a device taken out of their hands. Like, have somebody come up to you and take your phone out of your hands. How many times do we do that to children? I did it to my son the other day, and he was like, you don't like it when I do that to you. Why do you do it to me? I'm like, well, fine, because it's my phone. But he's right. I have to model what I want them to do. So we used to do shark. And so I give them an audible warning. So it wasn't just coming up out of nowhere, because they need time to prepare for that. And then I would say shark, and then they would shark their computer. So putting it at that 45, and they weren't allowed to touch their keyboard because the shark would bite them. And if they touch their keyboard, then I would come by and close their screen, which takes longer, right, for their screen to start up again. For iPads, if anybody has iPads, we used to say apples up, because if you turn your screen upside down, the apple is showing. So apples up or screens down. Even when I've worked with Ozobots a lot, these cute little baby robots, and they have a little dot that they sit on. And when we're not using, or if I'm giving instruction, I have them turn it off and put it on the dot, put it on its home base, because their ears physically do not work if that Ozobot is on, because it's like spinning and its little lights are flashing, like they just can't. And so we give them that expectation and remind them of it again and again. And if you think that just because you teach high school that you don't need to remind your students of this, you are wrong. And I don't want to be blunt about it, but we have to remind them. And it doesn't have to be big, blatant reminders, but it has to be said. And you give gentle reminders before you lash out with disciplinary action, because at the end of the day, they're children. Even your ones that don't look like children anymore, they are children, and they are learning, and we are learning too. We're learning all of these things with them. So one thing that you said, Robin, that I really, really loved was that when you start teaching it, you are not starting a big, huge academic heavy project and teaching them the technology skill at the same time. So what you're telling me is it's okay to focus on the technology separately until they get it, and then focus on the content.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I feel like for me, yes, it might feel in the beginning that you're wasting time, right? Because I've had that said to me. But it's time that you get back. Yeah. Because once they have the skill down, then the things that they can create and be critical and create and apply their learning is so much more meaningful, because they've gotten that skill set down.
Yeah.
And that's when you have the fun, because that's when you can start what I call doing like app smashing, right? Mm-hmm. And you've taught maybe, I always say, I'm not a fan of like using a bajillion tools in my class. I might use 5 throughout the year, but by the end of the year, that's 5 digital tools that my students know really well. And they can create something at the end based on their knowledge of all of those tools, because we've baby stepped them throughout the year and gotten to that point.
I think one of the things that I learned as an educational technology like coach in a district was, in a perfect world, students would be able to showcase their knowledge in the way that's most meaningful to them. Because I know for me, if I was given a project or an assignment, I would want to be able to showcase my knowledge in the way that suits me best. Just like I want to learn in the way that I learn best. And sitting in long lectures is not that way. It's not that way. I need hands-on, I need repetition. I'm a YouTube learner. I've learned I need audio and visual. I love being able to pause and go back and rewatch. So I think with students, it's the same thing. And the other thing that I see teachers show a lot of like nervous energy towards is, but I'm not an expert. And you don't need to be.
No.
And nobody's expecting you to be. You may be expecting yourself. You can still be a content area expert and not be an expert in the technology. Right. And I love, especially when my son is doing something and he comes and he's like, well, how do I do this? I'm like, I guess you're gonna have to figure it out. And so that's frustrating for him, and it takes him longer, but he's gonna learn it. Like I want him to learn it too. And so and we do that with all things, and kids can learn from each other. They can learn on their own. If you're really, just nervous about the tools and just the basics, you could use a website like Google's Applied Digital Skills. They have really great lessons. Some of them are more content heavy than others. Most of them are meant to be, agnostic, where you could be used with any topic. There's a really great one called All About a Topic, like a project, which could be used with just about anything. I also love the If Then Adventure lesson. Do you have any favorites from Applied Digital Skills? That would be a great place to start kind of practicing some of these digital citizenship conversations.
I can't think of any of those off the top of my head, but what I was kind of stuck with as you were describing your answer there was it's universal design for learning.
It is.
And so, and that's another big area of education right now too, is making sure that what's the end goal of learning, right? We want students to be able to show mastery of a content, right? And that they have taken ownership of that content and they can explain their learning. And so, and every kid learns in a different way. Like I was not a test taker. I am still not a test taker. It took me 5 tries to pass the test I needed to take to become a teacher. And I don't feel like passing that test after 5 tries and a lot of money invested into it made me a better teacher. It just means I was lucky enough to get the same question over again, and I had studied it from the last time I took it. That is not what made me a great teacher. And so I think we need to be able to give enough variety of tools and let students play with those tools. But again, we are the experts in the history and the math and the science, and we're helping them navigate that learning as well.
Yeah. I think too, I can already hear the whatabouts in my head. But how do we grade something like that? And I think, grading is always a challenging question. And I think we're going to be able to talk about that a little bit more in our 3rd session. But for right now, you can't let all of those whatabouts stop you from just getting started and just processing. And one of my favorite phrases to use with students, and most students understand this phrase, is being a beta tester. So in video gaming, and really in any sort of program engineering cycle, there's alpha testing and there's beta testing. And typically right before it launches publicly, they have what's called a beta test. A lot of your gamers in your classroom will understand beta testing. And so anytime I want to do something new with a group of students, I always ask, who wants to be my beta tester today? And almost all of them raise their hand. And of course, if I've got a kid that doesn't know what beta testing is, we always have, the gamer in the class explains it to them. And then everybody's in. Nobody's not excited about being a beta tester for the day, and just making it, kind of lighthearted. And then we try it out. And if I have to grade something, I'm going to grade the content. I'm going to grade the effort. I'm not going to worry about grading the PowerPoint. Does it have all of the things on there? Because what I wanted to see was, were they able to demonstrate their knowledge utilizing this tool? I don't always need to grade the use of the tool.
Right.
So
I think it gives me an example of like a lesson that we're currently doing right now in my 8th grade social studies class. So as a cumulative project, one of the options students were able to show for their understanding of the Civil War lesson was to take they have to find 10 big themes of the Civil War. And so it could be battle sites, it could be birthplaces of people, it could be the hometowns of certain individuals, but the 10 big themes that they walked away from learning. And they're using Google Earth to make a self-guided map of those 10 locations. And They're taking us to those places, and it's a virtual tour of those 10 places. So the content, right, is I want them to tell me why the Battle of Gettysburg is important. Now, the digital piece is they're going to actually physically take us there and show us the Battle of Gettysburg and what it looks like today. But really, they have to be able to explain what it is and write a summary that summarizes what took place there. So that's the content piece, right? I'm going to grade the content and make sense of the content. If they happen to mess up and fumble along the way of learning the tool, I'm not worried about that because they've had fun learning a tool that we haven't played with a lot throughout the school year.
Yeah.
But I'm still going back to the content. Is it the writing? Did they address the themes? did they have the correct math answer, whatever subject it is, right? You're looking at the content part of it. And if they learn and play a little bit with the tools along the way, that's great, because then they're walking away with two skills, right? They've learned content and they've learned a skill, and they've learned two things instead of just one thing.
Yeah, I love that. I know it's hard, the concept that not everything needs to be graded. And some things are, formative, or some things are just like for experience, or we're building this tool so we can use it again. And I like what you said earlier about you always get that time back. I worked with a second grade teacher a couple of years ago. She'd never really used Chromebooks in her classroom. She was terrified. We came in and we did Storybird together, which is not the easiest platform to like start with, but she was really enamored like when we showed it to her. And so we did Storybird, and it was challenging with second graders that had never used a Chromebook before, right? But we got through it. Did they get everything done? No, not even close. But they loved it and they had a blast. And we came back and we, fumbled through the rest of the lesson. The next year, she had me come back and we did it with her new group of second graders. And her face, when they got in, they logged in, we got through an entire class period in like the first 5 minutes. And she looked at me, she was like, how did they know how to do all of this? It's like, because whatever you were doing, your first grade counterpart was doing it with them too. Maybe not at this level, but she was working with them too, struggling, but working with them. And so all of those skills they learned in first grade, now they've brought to second grade. And your third graders are going to be so much better at whatever they're doing for that next grade. It really does build, and they learn. And that's important. I think we have one more. Yeah. So 5 core dispositions of digital citizenship. And I loved this, is again, like the word digital, like isn't even in half of these explanations. But slow down and self-reflect, explore perspectives, seek facts and evidence, envision options and possible impacts. Kind of like, what is that? There's an acronym about when you post something. Is it safe? Is it helpful? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
There's a couple of things where it's like, if I'm adding something to the world, there's an acronym of like, is it not, is it true, but like, is it helpful? Is it gonna drive me crazy?
Yes. I know. Yeah.
I think is it comment? It's like guidance around making comments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that, we want to be constructive with student comment. I'm going to figure out what that is.
Helpful, is it?
Yeah. Is it helpful? Is it, well, we're going to figure this out. Not right now, but yeah, I will figure it out. But this reminds me a lot of that. Envision options and possible impacts. Seek facts and evidence, explore perspectives. All of these things can be used with or without technology. But it is a big part of technology because it hyper connects us, where before, it took news all day to travel across town, where now it takes seconds, if that. And I think these are really valuable. Any feedback on these core dispositions? I think they're really great. Again, these are from Common Sense Media. And it said 5 and there's only 4 here. I don't know what happened to the 5th one. All right, so I think we're coming up to the end. Yes. So for you as a teacher, for an audience, you can share in the comments or not. What is a digital citizenship goal that you can focus on this year? And I know that's really broad, especially since you only have a couple months of the school year left. A big challenge for me this year, as somebody who has taught digital citizenship, but didn't actually have a lot of experience with it as a teacher. So I taught it as a coach and as a, as a leader in the school, but not as an actual teacher in a classroom with 30 kids and dealing with the ramifications of that. I really challenged myself to see it through the teacher perspective and really figure out how to make it real for them, how to make it meaningful. Because if we go back to our why, what's your why? If it doesn't mean anything, if it's not meaningful to students, then why are we doing it? And I think that's important. What about you, Robin?
I just feel like given all that we've experienced in this school year, in the world, I just think that the mindfulness, right? Like being mindful of our impact, what we say impacts others, and helping our kiddos and the adults also in our lives, whether it's our parents who use Facebook, or whether it's the aunt or uncle that we know is posting things. Just helping them be mindful of like what they say goes out there, and you can't always take things back. And so how you say things matters. And that's a life goal for whether you're face to face or whether you're only ever online with people.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today. If you guys have any questions before we sign off, please throw them in the chat. I'm going to be sharing this out with you guys. This is a freebie for you in your class. As long as you don't complain about it, you can use it. It's actually findable if you search for this. This is I did a teacher leadership program a couple years ago, and we had a global citizen like unit. And instead of doing a traditional like slideshow presentation, I built a digital breakout game utilizing Google Sites and Forms about digital citizenship. So this is that project. It's from 2017. So it is old, but it still works. So if you want to do this with your students, or if you want to do it yourself, if you've never done a digital breakout, it's a pretty easy one to start with. We'll send you kind of a directions on how digital breakout works, and we'll be emailing this link out to everybody who signed up for the webinar. You're free to use this. If you want to make a copy of it and you want to like make it your own, you can book a time with me and I will happily walk you through that. I can't just give you access to all of it, because then you could accidentally change what other people use for this, because it is a public site. But I'm happy to show you like the back end and make copies and kind of help you set it up, for your own use. I've done that before and it's super fun. And I love that this has gotten so much use over the years. Something that I made that I spent hours and hours and hours on, but people really like it. And it's just kind of something fun. If you haven't really broached the topic about digital citizenship and what it means to your students, this is a great like icebreaker to do with them. It also requires a little bit of perseverance and persistence, because the answers aren't like right in front of your face. So, and then lastly, don't forget, we will be here the next 2 weeks at the same time. Next week, we're going to be demystifying and defining student privacy, along with like all of the FERPA, COPA, SIPAs, all of those fun alphabet soup acronyms, and really breaking it down for what does it mean for you as a teacher, who's responsible for what layer of it, because obviously your admin, your school leadership is part of that, but it also impacts you as an educator, and it's really important to understand it. And even though our schools do training on it, I still feel like stuff gets missed. And so we're hoping to make that a little bit more relatable during next week's call. So let me just check real quick and see if there's any questions. I don't see any. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Robin, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your expertise, and hopefully we get to see you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mandy. Savior.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you finding that. That saved me another 10 minutes of my life. So thank you. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.